Now, I'm not sure if me making a part 2 to this video is a testament to how well the first video did, love you guys by the way, or if it just shows how bad GW is at keeping track of their shit.
Smasher, hurry! Go on, kill the boy!
Who the fuck are you?
So as it says here in the title, this is part 2 in a series of factions that have been forgotten by the lore, or just generally don't get as much attention as they should compared to how much the fans like them in terms of novels. Now before we get into the list, let me first address some mistakes from my previous video, and the big one being, I am sorry about the Exodites, everyone. I did not know they were in Infinite and Divine in a large capacity. Yeah, apparently they actually play a decent role in that book as opposed to just being set dressing, and do have named characters. I'm sorry guys, I haven't actually read the book, I never got my hands on it, and the audience basically skinned my ass alive for it. Sorry. But I do actually stand by my ranking of them, because despite how much Maiden Worlds are mentioned as an Eldar plot device, they appear comparatively less. The Infinite and Divine is a one-off book. A really, really good book, but it's just a one-off. They're not part of any larger campaigns, they don't have models, they don't have any really significant characters or plot devices in regards to the overarching current story, you know. The first on the list is the one that was most requested in the comments on the first video, that being the Lucifer Blacks. Now, the Lucifer Blacks were an old regiment of Imperial Army from pre-unification Terra, which I believe makes them one of the vaunted Old 100. And these guys were the best of the best. Highly combat effective, very mentally competent, everything you would want in a specialist soldier. And it showed in their reputation, because they were famed throughout the Imperium, and were often assigned to be bodyguards for very important individuals, including Lord Commanders and even High Lords of Terra. They were also assigned to guard the Imperial Palace, effectively making them the human equivalent of custodians. Yeah, that's the level these guys were on. And in the book Legion by Dan Abnett, we really see these guys at their best, wherein one of the Lucifer Blacks, the head of a small regiment assigned to protect Lord Commander Namet Jira of an entire expedition fleet, is able to suss out the identity of John Grammaticus, the agent of the Cabal and the worst character in Warhammer 40,000. Now, John Grammaticus is described as one of the best covert warfare specialists in the entire galaxy, and he is still found out by this Lucifer Black, because he leaves a note taunting the Lucifer Black who was hunting him, saying, "Better luck next time." So then he stops to think what he could glean from this note, and he realizes, if someone's gonna leave a note, they're either stupid or super confident. This guy clearly isn't stupid, he was able to kill one of my best guards in hand-to-hand combat, something he was very difficult for John to do, by the way. And if he's that confident, that must mean his disguise is foolproof. What would be the best disguise for a spy? Another spy. So that means one of our spies in this expedition fleet must be whoever this infiltrator is. Then he immediately rifles off where all their spies are located and finds the gap, the one who would most likely be hardest to account for when missing, and therefore is probably John Grammaticus, and he's right. He also is able to find several Alpha Legion operatives hiding within the fleet. John Grammaticus is trained by an ancient alien seer council, and the Alpha Legion operatives are operatives of the Alpha Legion, yet he still finds them out. Oh, and let's not forget, he lands 2 solid hits on Alfarius, the real Alfarius. The first time Alfarius comes up behind him and says hi, and he spins around and wedges his sword in his armor before even thinking, realizing, oh shit, he could probably kill me for that, but he doesn't. And the second time, he attacks Alfarius head-on out of sheer sense of duty. It takes balls to attack a fucking Primarch on order, and does manage to hit him with an amazing display of blade work. Granted, he doesn't do any actual damage, but he does hit him and is immediately killed for it. But still, he also does lose some points because while he was able to find John Grammaticus, he doesn't actually kill him. So, hey, you know, I'll take what I can get. And these guys actually have an interesting history because they lose a lot of their prestige during the War of the Beast when Eldari Harlequins infiltrate the Imperial Palace, slipping right past them and then coming to blows with the Custodians. This causes them to generally be removed from their position of guarding the palace by the new head of the High Lords of Terra, Draken Vangoric. But by the time of the 13th Black Crusade, remember, Draken Vangoric was ousted and denounced as insane, they have regained a lot of their prestige and are once again guarding the Imperial Palace. Their names are once again known and revered across the galaxy. I would really like to hear from them. They're mentioned in the Watches of the Throne books, which are considered canon books. Some books are considered, while not non-canon, just not really relevant to the main story, but Watches of the Throne is, and it's a good book. So I would love to see more of the Lucifer Blacks. Let us know what's going on in their mind. I want to see them do that real Black Ops detective work with their gun in their hand again. Now, switching over to the other side, much like I did in the previous video, I need to talk about the Lost and the Damned. Now, initially for this section, I was going to just go with the Blood Pact, which is a regiment of traitor guardsmen, a full, well-supplied regiment, all dedicated to Khorne, who maintain established discipline and hierarchy and can follow through on orders instead of just being an undisciplined mob. They serve as antagonists in the Sabbat World books. You know, the ones with Commissar Gaunt and the Tanith First and Only? Those ones. But they do make some appearances in modern books, such as the Urdesh novels, which deal with the Iron Snakes chapter in the Sabbat Worlds. But that's why this section is going to a much larger category. The aforementioned Lost and the Damned. Now, what the Lost and the Damned are is the humans and mortal guardsmen who have fallen under the sway of chaos and usually serve under the leadership and overlordship of a Chaos Space Marine, a demon, or an arch heretic. We do see them as antagonists in books, usually guardsmen books or Inquisition books. However, we very rarely have them being significant named characters. Sure, maybe a named character will serve as a lead antagonist or a partial antagonist, but it would be really interesting to get some media and novels from the perspective of the Lost and the Damned, about their interpersonal relationships, their thoughts and feelings on things, because consider, some of the best, most compelling books are the ones from the perspectives of Chaos Space Marines, the Iron Warriors Omnibus, the Black Legion series, the Wordbearers Omnibus. You know, it should also be noted that the Lost and the Damned are not just baseline humans, but are also often mutants and even beastmen. Mutants, obviously, we know are not well liked in the Imperium, and beastmen even more so. Beastmen do serve in their own special ranks and can be considered abhuman, but generally speaking are treated worse. They're mutants, sure, but just because they look animalistic in nature, having horns and snouts and stuff, they conjure demonic imagery and are therefore shunned even more than regular mutants, even by regular mutants. These are far and away the most abused and downtrodden people in the Imperium of Man, and that's saying a lot, so it would be really interesting to have their perspective seen and hear their thoughts on the Imperium, why they betrayed the Imperium. And it should also be known, a lot of Lost and the Damned have interesting thoughts about the Emperor and still view him as a god in the warp or an entity of sorts. Like the Blood Pact, they have a respect for the Emperor to a degree, but it's really interesting because they still chose Khorne. It's something I'd love to see more of explored deeply as opposed to them just being waves of nameless antagonists. Another example of the Lost and the Damned that comes to mind in an organized sense is the Brotherhood of the Knife. Vicious and motivated cultists who use these knives to stab people. Okay, I realize now that was the stupidest fucking thing I could have said, but I will leave it in for the sake of eating a little crow. Please, bask in my shame. And they're known for working very closely along with the Wordbearers. You see, they were actually instrumental in helping break the Ultramarines at the betrayal of Khal, with their rituals and even mass suicides. And these guys are still active and working alongside the Wordbearers 10,000 years later. I would like to know about this dangerous cult that has been active for 10,000 years. I want to know about some of their members. I think they could make really interesting characters should a novel permit. We get a really cool character, I forget his name, I'm sorry, in the book No Fear, and that's something I'd like to see more of. What motivates people to join this cult? How do they function internally? What's their own culture like? What traditions and quirks have they developed over 10,000 years of operation? With the new World Eater army, we've gotten special cultist unists, the Jackals, who have like 8 drops of World Eater blood in them. So what about for the word bearers? If they get a rework, we could get Brotherhood of the Knife units as opposed to just hordes of nameless standard cultists. And this goes even further if you want to go that full hardcore mystic cultist route with the Cognitae. Now, if you know anything about the Cognitae, these guys are scary. They are an ancient organization all the way back to when the Emperor was still basically young and was just some petty king on Terra who sought to control and direct the evolution and development of humanity using a language called Enuncia. Enuncia being a language of creation. You can use words to speak things into existence or affect the mortal realm. And it has nothing to do with being a psyker. You just speak the words and things just happen, usually fucking insane and horrifying things. It's actually rumored to be the language of the Old Ones. Now, even though their plans have changed and their designs have shifted over the many millennia they've been active. Remember, these guys were active in the BCs. They built the Tower of Babel in 40K and are still active all the way until the 41st millennium. They only really exist in the books, in ones written by Dan Abnett, like his Inquisition books, you know, the ones with Eisenhorn and now Beckwin, as well as brief mentions in some of the ending parts of the Siege of Terra. They're really important, but I would love to see them fleshed out more, but not too much as to not kill the mystery. And they have absolutely ferocious combatants, high-skilled assassins, and insane technological weapons that would make for some awesome models. Like, imagine having Cognitae Agent be one of your command units in an army where the keyword is Lost and the Damned. Now, similar to the Lost and the Damned would be another group that gets overlooked and has ample reason to hate the Imperium. That being Xenos Pirates. And I'm not just pulling that one out of my ass there. Then it's not just the Drukhari or the Eldari Corsairs, because we do see examples of minor Xenos races who regularly raid Imperial shipping and expand either petty empires into Imperial space or work as mercenaries for anti-Imperial forces. There's really interesting examples of each. My favorite one of these being a race called the Fraal, who are a highly psychic race with very advanced technology with their own interstellar empire in the Segmentum Obscurus. Now, when I say Psi powerful, these guys have technology that puts the Psi Titans of the Ordo Sinister to shame. They are very powerful, and they actually refer to humans as Impral. So, like, we have an inkling into what their language is like, which I think is cool. We should really see more of them, especially since the Imperium has fought them on and off ever since the Great Crusade. This can also be said about another race called the Crave, who are actually these psychic mind eaters, and that look like giant bats. They're known for having, again, their own little interstellar empire. We really should see more of the smaller Xenos empires that still exist within the Milky Way galaxy, especially since the Crave are actually old enough to predate the Eldar. Yeah, that's nuts, that there are still races older than them active in the galaxy. But not all of them have their own empires, and a perfect example of this is the Torellian Dog Soldiers. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack right there. They're these sort of dog-faced, canid aliens who serve across the galaxy as mercenaries and have a very strong, honor-bound warrior culture. That's cool in and of itself, but a big thing about them is they hate humans and hate the Imperium on a deep, personal level, because some of their planets were actually virus-bombed back during the Great Crusade, and they're still bitter about it, to the point where people like Alpha Legion warlords will recruit these guys and use them as allies to give their fighting groups very irregular, atypical styles to keep the Imperial defenders on their toes. And Huron Blackheart even has some of these guys on side, which I think is really, really cool. That's actually a funny thing to realize, is that humans are one of the most hated species in the entire galaxy, and whenever they show up in places where Xenos tend to congregate, they are treated with suspicion and given a load of side-eye from everyone because the Imperium is such an overwhelming force in the galaxy. And I wish we got to see a little more of that, because some of the books that deal with things like that, those out-of-the-way settings, like the Blackstone Fortress books by Darius Hinks, are really, really good. And it goes beyond that, even into other races we hear about in other books, such as the Rangdan, or the Slot. The Slot are these disgusting corpse-eating maggot men, and the Rangdan were their own oppressive alien empire that had a lot of human worlds enslaved to their cause, that the Dark Angels had to basically shatter at great cost to themselves. We hear a lot about the Rangdan Xenocides here and there as background information, but we don't know what they look like and have basically no information about them. Like, who knows, maybe now that the Lion's back, it would be the perfect time to have a few Rangdan remnants make their move and really become a nuisance in the galaxy wherever they are, because sure, they were really broken in an Imperial sense, but are they extinct? We don't really know that. Another really cool example people want to see more of, by people I mean me for certain, is the Slythe. They're these muscular, four-armed reptilian creatures with a giant tail for a leg, I always love that in the reptilians, that serve as dumb muscle for Drukhari Archons. They're very, very powerful and loyal to their Drukhari employers because, reasonably, what else do you have to do? Where else are you gonna go? You get paid, you do the job. I would just like to see more of them, partially because that would mean seeing more Drukhari in a deeper cultural sense as opposed to just people who appear on the battlefield. Hey, but that's just me. And I think if we got some models for Thrall, if we ever learn what they look like, Crave, Dog Soldier, all of those along with Eldar Corsair, and even a few new ones, it could go a long way with having a full-blown Xenos Pirate keyword, or maybe just a keyword for pirate, where you can basically bunch up anything that could fit in there. Now, would that do a lot to change the overarching story? No, and I think that's probably part of the appeal. You can add a lot that people would like, but without fucking up the main story. And it would also go a long way in helping flesh out the setting as a whole, making the galaxy feel more lived in than it does currently. Making the galaxy feel, you know, more alive, more lived in per se. Because when you look at other galaxies like Star Trek or Star Wars, they feel much more packed and much more lived in. But I wouldn't want it to be like that, where people in Xenos are just buddy-buddy all the time and you can go anywhere and everything's just great. I think having Xenos Pirates would help to show how hostile the galaxy is, how there really are threats at every turn in this galaxy. And on a similar note, GW has also forgotten about rogue traders. Now, I love rogue traders. These guys are nobles who are usually not the scions of their houses or are disgraced elements of their families and have therefore been given the warrant of trade from the Imperium, which lets them travel freely out of Imperial space and explore unknown reaches or places that other people generally aren't allowed on their own merits and interact with Xenos or outsiders of their own volition and by their own discretion. Of course, they do have some rules. They can't go into open heresy, but they have so much more freedom than the average Imperial could ever dream of, and use it to trade for things, gain information, learn, bring back information to the Imperium, and it's all so cool and interesting. These guys get themselves into some wacky situations, and will end up with Xenos in their crew. It's not unheard of for them to have some Eldar in their service, or other kinds of Xenos. They will also sometimes end up running into these eldritch abominations that they have to use their wits to get out of instead of fighting their way out. It's awesome, and GW does not do enough with rogue traders at all, in my opinion. Now, rogue traders actually do have a place on the tabletop. They're guards, and there even is a rogue trader character under the keyword of Agents of the Imperium, and I would like to see that expanded upon. Now, to show you just how interesting rogue traders are, and how much more screen time they should get, let me give you an example. There was a rogue trader who, in a book, the Horusian Wars books by John French, retells the time where he was kidnapped by Drukhari. The reason he was kidnapped is because he was working with some peaceful pacifist Xenos, but double-crossed them in a trade deal. However, they didn't take that lying down, no. They handed him over to the Drukhari, which is horrifying. And normally this would be the end of the line for anyone else, but this rogue trader, even while he's being tortured by a homunculus, gets it to reach into his coat pocket and pull something out. It pulls out a little rainbow-colored rock, a rock that he got from these peaceful aliens, and when the homunculus holds it, quote, everything just feels good. It basically gets you stoned in a kind of way. It's got that kind of really mellowing, nice effect. So, thinking on his feet, he immediately cuts them a deal, wherein he will lead them to these aliens and let them just raid them and plunder them in exchange for his freedom. And the Drukhari actually take him up on it in earnest, because they're amused more than anything, he thinks, by his treachery and his perfidiousness. And sometimes it's just fun to follow through on a deal just for the sake of it. Realistically, who else could have gotten out of that situation so slickly like that? Not a Space Marine, not a Guardsman, probably not a Craftworld Eldar. I can't think of a Tau or either or anything that could have just finessed them that hard. Honestly, I wish we got to see more of that in books. Now, before we get to number 1, let's bring up a few honorable mentions as is tradition. Number 1 being Tau Auxiliaries. This one was actually mentioned a lot in the comments on the first video, but I didn't want to include it because Tau Auxiliaries, namely the Vespids people miss so much, that's one people kept bringing up, are getting more attention, specifically in the new book, Shadowsun the Patient Hunter, because that sees the return of the Tau goddess, Tauva. Now this goddess actually confronts a Death Guard Chaos Lord in the warp when his ship is becalmed, and he says, no, that's not possible, there is no god of the Tau, their Tau are faithless. But it replies, yes, but their auxiliaries are not. Well, they're allies, but you know what I mean. And then proceeds to basically just crush the guy like a bug and make him go insane. So, this makes it clear auxiliaries are going to play a much bigger part in the ongoing Tau storyline moving forward. Namely, we see the Tau splitting into 3 separate factions. Farsight's faction, which are more ethereal skeptic. The ethereal faction probably going to be headed up by Commander Surestrike, and the Faithful faction, a new Tau religion which, while needing the auxiliaries, would be headed up by Tau, because the most faithful Tau we see is Commander Shadowsun herself, who openly starts praying to the Tau goddess of her own volition even when she doesn't need to. The Tau faith is probably going to become a genuine force in their little area of space, and that will require auxiliaries. So hopefully we get to see all the cool aliens that are amalgamated into the Tau Empire. We hear descriptions of fungal ones, we know there's the Galag, we know about an Ursine-looking race, obviously there's the Kroot and the Vespids and the humans, and more besides. The next honorable mention is the Kinebrach. Oh, that might take a bit of you by surprise, because aren't you thinking, hey, the Kinebrach were that alien race, which was subsidiary to the Interex. You know, that human civilization which had like a weird culture and was very advanced and was basically crushed under the boot of the Imperium during the Great Crusade. You know, it was a whole thing about Horus's fall to chaos, yada yada yada. And the Kinebrach made that weapon, the Anathame, that was able to wound Horus. Yeah, that is them. And yeah, they might be returning. Now, if you've watched this channel for any period of time, you know that while I do pull something out of my ass now and again, I do have at least a bit to grab onto before I really get tugging. That was a disgusting analogy. I am absolutely sorry I just put you all through that. And there is something here. Namely, it's one throwaway line in one book. And not just any random side story, an important mainline book written by a very important author. Oh, you might want me to elaborate on that. Well, guess what? I'm not going to. In fact, you're gonna have to subscribe to the channel and tune in, because I'm gonna make a full video about my theory regarding the return of the Kinebrach and by extension the Interex, if only in a form. You know, something people have been wondering about and hoping for in no small part for a long time now. There's the button, right down there. What have you got to lose? Okay, all jokes aside, I would love to make that video in the near future because it's really interesting, and it's been a while since I've made a proper theory video, like my Gods of Order or Why the Old Ones Made Humans, both of which are some of the best videos on my channel in terms of views. Thank you guys so much for all your interest in those. And number 1 in terms of factions that we want back that GW has just forgotten about is the Digganobs. Oh yeah. Now, for those who don't know or might be out of the loop, or for those who support me stretching out the runtime of this video because I'm just gonna not explain it, come on. The Digganobs are actually humans, despite how they look, who are descended from human settlers to the planet of Angelus in the, like, far galactic northeast, which explains how this weird situation came to be without Imperial intervention. You see, while these people were surveying the planet, their ship was crashed into by an Orc space hulk. Now, once the Orcs came to ground on the planet, they couldn't agree on who their new ship to leave the planet looked like, Gork or Mork, so eventually destroyed it in their infighting, but after it was destroyed, they managed to come to an agreement saying that it should be called Gorka Morka because it could look like either of them. Great Orc diplomacy at work, you'll love to see it. And that's how the planet got its new name, Gorka Morka. Now, what happened to those human settlers? They actually, over time, went utterly feral, devolving into small tribal bands that would make war on each other while living amongst the pyramid structures that were on the planet they had been studying at the time. There are Necrons on this fucking planet, by the way. Let's just make that clear to everybody. And they began to adopt Orcish culture, going so far as to have Orcish-like technology, you know, that ramshackle scrap, and even painting themselves green and possibly even adopting Orc gods. That's so weird and so interesting and just so goofy. Just humans acting like orcs and talking like Du Bois and whatnot, and having their own subdivisions, like they're called Diggas because they tend to live in subterranean caves. And the largest ones are called Diggas, with Psykers being known as Digga Shamans, young ones being called Digga Youths, that sort of thing. It's its own little culture, and I just wish GW hadn't cast aside something so goofy and that the fans absolutely love so much. The only real mentions of it are from around 1998, but they do get a shout out in the book The Infinite and the Divine. Yeah, that's right, I didn't forget to mention The Infinite and the Divine this episode. Got you there. Wherein Trazyn has a small section in his gallery dedicated to the planet that he really likes and is really proud of. And honestly, you know what? Mood. Trazyn is just a huge mood in that regard. And let's not forget, Diggas used to have their own minis way back in the day. So if GW was able to maybe just revamp them and give them a keyword, why not bring them in as Orc Auxiliaries? They would absolutely sell. People in the fandom would go nuts over that and would just love showing them off and making their own Digga conversions, trust me. But what do you guys think? Which of these factions would you most want to see return to 40k in a lore sense or even on the tabletop? Do you think any of these are overrated and I just missed on them? Or do you think I was completely on the mark? Would you want to see the inclusion of more goofy things like the Diggas? Or do you prefer 40k having a more dark and intense and seriousness to its setting? I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.